We thank them for our continued use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. Thank you all for tuning in. Town Hall is proud to be a community-focused organization and a place where we can share and sustain ideas and creativity, even if that means we can't gather in person. I'd like to thank Mark and Samantha for appearing tonight to help make that possible. Town Hall will be continuing to produce virtual content this fall, and many of our past talks are available in video or podcast form on our digital media library. Town Hall is adding new events and podcasts every day. Upcoming programs include a conversation with Kurt and Anna Warner, sharing about their family and an autism diagnosis of their twins, presented with Seattle Public Library, Barney Scott Mann on his journey alongside the Pacific Coast Trail, and BJ Cummings with James Ramison and Paulina Lopez about the impact of the Duwamish River on our region. Town Hall and the nonprofit community at large have been put under significant strain due to the event cancellations and the ever-changing landscape. We hope you will consider extending your generosity to help support us during this difficult time by making a donation by clicking the donate button at the bottom of your screen or becoming a member. You can also make a donation online or text Town Hall to 44321 to give. Our partner booksellers have also been hit by the negative effects of the COVID outbreak and can use your support as well. If you're interested in supporting local independent bookstores by purchasing a copy of the book being presented tonight, please use the link on this live stream page to purchase through Elliott Bay Book Company. For viewers who want to watch this broadcast with closed captioning, we recommend viewing the stream via our YouTube page. To enable real-time closed captioning, click the PC button in the bottom right corner of the video player. The video will be available for rewatching immediately following today's broadcast. Tonight's presentation will be about 45 minutes, followed by Q&A. Mark and Samantha will select questions from those submitted in the Ask a Question field at the bottom center of your screen. You can also vote on which questions will be addressed by clicking the arrow next to the question to upload it. We cannot guarantee that we will be able to address every question, but we will try to get to as many as possible. Please keep your questions concise and in the form of a question. Town Hall's work is made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. Our Arts and Culture series is supported by For Culture, Art Fund, Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, and Windcoat Foundation. Finally, Town Hall is a member-supported organization, so I'd like to thank all of them for watching tonight. Mark Gevisser is a South African author and journalist. His book, A Legacy of Liberation, Sal Mabik and the Future of the South African Dream and Portraits of Power, Profiles in a Changing South Africa, focuses on South African politics. His memoir, Lost and Found in Johannesburg, explores his fascination with maps, boundaries, and transgressions, and he is also the co-editor of the path-breaking anthology, Defiant Desire, Gay and Lesbian Lives in South Africa. His journalism and commentary have appeared in The New York Times, The Guardian, The Wall Street Journal, and others. Samantha Allen is a GLAAD award-winning journalist and author of Real Queer America, LGBT Stories from Red State. Her writing has been published in the New York Times, CNN, Rolling Stone, and more. She holds a PhD in Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies from Emory University and received the Kingsley Institute's John Money Fellowship for Scholars of Technology in London. Gevisser's book, The Pink Line, Journeys Across the World, Queer Frontiers, is the subject of tonight's talk. Please join me in welcoming Mark Gevisser and Samantha Allen.
Hooray, welcome, Mark. I'm so excited to get to chat with you.
Very happy to be here with you, Samantha. It was meant to be in person in Seattle. Obviously, the pandemic had other ideas, and it's so great that Town Hall has this digital platform so we can talk anyway.
I agree. Thanks, Town Hall, for accommodating us. And I hope to visit you in South Africa one day when being able to fly on an airplane is, a thing again that won't inspire as much abject terror. Thank you for joining me. The Pink Line is it's just a tremendous book. Just the sensitivity and the delicacy of these portraits of LGBTQ lives around the world, while having this huge expansive scope. I was lucky enough to read it last year. I just listened to the Audible version to get refreshed for our conversation. I wore a pink shirt in honor of the Pink Line. So I'm trying to stay festive with it. But you've been working on this book in some form for for 7 years. And so for, people who might be new to the book, might not have heard of it, might not be as, have read it twice like I have by now. Tell us a bit about how it was born, how it came into being, and at what point you said, I really need to kind of take these things I've been observing and researching and make a book out of it.
I suppose, thank you, Samantha. I suppose it began for me. I'm a gay man who came out in 1982, and increasingly in recent years, I've been thinking what many queer people my generation have thought, which is that how extraordinary that this world is so different to what we imagined it might be when we were coming out, when we were coming into our adulthood. And I knew I wanted to track what was becoming an increasingly global conversation that seemed to be establishing a new human rights frontier around sexual orientation and gender identity. And that seemed to me to be describing and dividing the world in a whole new way. So that's where it began. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to listen to this conversation, particularly given that I'm South African and I live in South Africa, on the African continent, I need to understand it globally. I need to understand how sort of messages about rights, about identity, about personal autonomy that are sort of transmitted globally through the digital revolution, because of course that's the huge difference between my generation and a younger generation. How these messages sort of land in different places of the world, and how when they land, they are, I don't know what you'd say, indigenized, and how they then interact with whatever else was going on in those places to begin with, whether those places are India or Mexico or Russia or Uganda, Egypt, Israel, Palestine. These are some of the places I write about in the book.
Yeah, so you developed this like heuristic of the pink line, which I mean, you can describe it better than I can, but it's sort of this guiding methodology that you use through each of the countries you visited, and that you trace through the lives of your interview subjects. How would you define the pink line? How do you trace it in each place? And what I admire about it is you take these very complex, interesting, messy terrains where forces of globalization and internet LGBTQ culture and, state politics all collide, and you kind of trace like a fault line through each of them around like queerness.
I mean, the notion of the pink line came to me. I can remember the exact moment. It's when the penny dropped, when I was sort of making my timeline. The penny dropped that in 2013, the very same year that the United Kingdom promulgated a same-sex marriage act, Nigeria, a former British colony, promulgated an anti-same-sex marriage act, even though nobody in Nigeria was even thinking about or talking about same-sex marriage. The most that queer people in Nigeria wanted was sort of freedom from harassment and terrible violence. Now, once I saw that, I thought there's a pink line that divides the United Kingdom and Nigeria. And on one side of this pink line are places that are folding in a new understanding of rights into an already existing liberal democratic framework. And on the other side of this pink line are countries that, as this new phenomenon is becoming known, are doing their best to expel or keep this phenomenon out of what they believe to be their sort of sovereign right as a nation. Now, on both sides of this pink line, I saw contention. I saw ideas being defended and other ideas being attacked. So on one side of this pink line, it might have been around, which is, if you like, the Nigerian side, might have been a line against neo-colonial secular decadence that was perceived to be assaulting some kind of essential African purity. On the other side of this pink line, it was by many people beginning to be a new way of tracing a border between we, the civilized people, and them, the barbarians. And as I thought about this, I began to wonder what it must be like to live on the pink line, where your experience is weaponized in this way, where your meaning becomes greater than your call for rights or your bodily self. So that's how the pink line idea began. But as I began to think about it more, I realized that the pink line doesn't just run between countries; it runs through countries too. And I look, for example, at the way, I'm sure we'll talk about this a bit later, the way it runs through the United States, as in the United States homosexuality became normalized and transgender rights became the sort of new culture wars battleground. How the pink line runs through the United States between the red states and the blue, all the way through children's bathrooms, whether a child has the right to use the bathroom congruent with their gender identity. I also began to see how the pink line, so the pink line became this quite elastic concept, because I began to see how the pink line also kind of delineates a boundary between the freedom that a person might have online as they access the community and the information of a sort of global queer culture, and then offline once they sort of look up from their smartphone and have to deal with the family, the state, the church, all these institutions that might tell them that they are sinners or perverts or doing something illegal. So the pink line works in all these ways, and in each of the countries I write about, I try and examine how the pink line runs through those countries and what it means to live along it.
I think one of the things I really admire about it is, you've got this big idea, the pink line, and you trace how it runs through countries, but you also trace how it runs through individual people's lives. The book kind of goes back and forth between reportage, like on the countries themselves or on global issues, with balancing these very like intimate portraits of kind of like a handful of folks that you've selected and that you've followed their stories and lives over the years. Maybe tell us a bit about, some of the people you profiled, just kind of briefly, and like how you settled on this format of kind of like on one hand, this big global expansive scope, but telling that story of the big idea of the pink line through these really like zoomed in micro level portraits of people you came to know really deeply.
I mean, Samantha, we're both journalists, and I think we do, having read your book, quite similar journalism, insofar as we both believe. Well, I shouldn't say what you believe. what I really hold to after many years as a journalist is that the very best way to track change is to put yourself on the shoulder of somebody going through that change and to watch how they negotiate it and facilitate it. So I've always believed that those sort of personal narratives are the best way of understanding sort of big, complex socio-political phenomena. And that's certainly how I've written about South Africa in the past. That being said, there's so much history and information and data that I wanted to capture as well. And I didn't want the people I was writing about to be overly burdened by that data. I wanted them to be able to live and breathe for my readers, for you. So I came up with this idea of interleaving these intimate, deep profiles with bigger, more discursive, if you like, analytical chapters, and they alternate through the book. I begin in my current hometown, which is Cape Town, with a transgender woman who I've got to know very well over the years, who's an extraordinary Malawian woman. Malawi is a country in Central Africa. Her name is Tuwonga Chimbalanga. And in 2009, she held a public engagement ceremony with her fiance. And as a result, she was the headlines in all the newspapers. And the morning after those headlines, the law arrived, arrested her and her fiance, threw her in jail in an absolutely abject, humiliating trial. She and her fiance were sentenced to 14 years hard labor for for having been guilty of carnal knowledge against the order of nature, even though there was no evidence of that. There was just this public engagement ceremony. It caused an international uh, uh, hoo-ha, and Madonna got involved because Madonna has Malawian children. Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations at the time, sort of flew on a mercy mission to try and persuade the Malawian president to pardon them, and they were pardoned. And when they were pardoned, Amnesty International, which had been supporting her, sort of looked around and said, "Oh, South Africa, there's a country where there are LGBTQ rights. There's a country where the Constitution outlaws discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. We'll send her there." So Tiwonga came to South Africa, where she was accorded refugee status on the basis of her gender identity, and she now lives about 20 kilometers away from me. Her life was not nearly as easy here as she and Amnesty International imagined it might be. I begin by describing her story, which is really phenomenal. It's a story of great tribulation, but also great courage. And I then move up through Africa to describe the story, to tell the story of a young Ugandan man who I met in Kampala, then to Egypt, a really amazing lesbian couple who came out during the Arab Spring and opened a shisha cafe, a sidewalk cafe, which was the center of queer life in Cairo before the crackdown of 2013. And then onwards from there through the world to India, to Russia, to Mexico, to the United States, to Israel and Palestine. I wish I could have gone everywhere, but budget and space prevented that. And I don't want my book to be an encyclopedia. It isn't. It is rather a careful look at a few places that I believe are emblematic of these new dynamics I described.
Yeah, that's definitely something I relate to. Yeah, my most recent book was also like a travelogue through, queer life in more conservative parts of the United States. And it's a daunting project, but as a journalist, okay, I have to break this down into bite-sized pieces. I have to select representative examples, a handful of lives. And you do such this amazing job. The Egypt chapter just really struck me re-listening to it, just like of making you feel like you're in these places, inhabiting these places, sharing conversations with people. So sorry, I keep fusing about this book, but I just love how it takes you at once, like, a Carmen Sandiego-esque journey around the world, and yet it also has these very claustral, like, warm scenes of just, sharing a coffee with someone at a cafe, or just sitting with someone and inhabiting their space. I wanted to touch on something, just a reminder for our folks watching at home that you can ask questions at any time, and I'll get to them when we get to that point. Just want to be sure folks are queuing up thoughts as we talk. But I think something you and I are both concerned with in our work and our journalism on queer lives is this idea of how change happens. And something that I sort of recognize as like an interesting parallel in our work is trying to balance describing the kind of big macro level structural things that can cause change, court decisions, protests, laws being enacted or repealed, or that kind of thing, versus what I think is sometimes the harder to trace form of change, and often what makes the most impactful difference on the lives of our subjects, which is interpersonal change with, relatives, spouses, children, partners, ex-partners. How do we hold both of these things at once, and what kind of theory of change have you developed as you've kind of tried to look at both of those simultaneously?
As you were talking, Samantha, I was remembering an interaction I had with an amazing koti in South India. And a koti, I'll just describe to the people listening, is an Indian gender category that means woman's heart in men's body, and it's a sort of subset of what people might know of as hijras, which are very much part of Indian life, third gendered people in India. So this Koti's name was Mahana, and she was a fisherman in a little Indian fishing village south of Chennai on the Tamil Nadu coast. And when I first met Mahana and the other Kotis in her village, I was really interested in them because they'd set up a temple uh, to worship a deity that required them to wear saris, which was very useful for them, and was a way that they were trying to keep themselves, have some value within their community, rather than having to leave their community and join. But when I say their community, I mean their home community, their families. They were determined not to have to leave their families and become part of another society of hijras, the way it happens with most Indian people. And the first time I met them was in 2012, and there'd been a huge, long, national, ongoing debate in India about the decriminalization of sexuality, and specifically a penal code number 377. And I described to Mahana the 377 code, and I asked her what she thought about it. And she'd never heard of it. And she didn't even know that homosexuality was criminalized. And she said to me, the law, please. I have absolutely no problem with the law. I know exactly how to deal with policemen. I either bribe them or fuck them. My problem is the family. Tell me how to solve that problem, and I'll be free. And those words really stuck with me and struck me. Not to say that the law isn't a huge issue when it comes to violence against queer people and the harassment of queer people. And in fact, as I've been watching what's been unfolding in the United States in the last month or so, a phrase has been going through my mind, the phrase queer lives matter, because so much of the LGBTQ rights movement has been about saying to the law, respect us, protect us, don't fight us the way you have from Stonewall in the US onwards. Anyway, that's an aside. The point is that what Mahana taught me and what I saw over and over again was how absolutely critical these interpersonal relationships are. How in a country like Ireland, to use a very different example, the way marriage equality was won was through a campaign that got conservative Irish people to see that the homosexuals who they wanted to deny rights to were their intimate family members. That really was. There's been a fascinating book written about it. That is what facilitated that extraordinary 2015 victory in Ireland. But there's always an awkward dance between that kind of legal reform and social change. It's by no means an easy dance at all. And it doesn't necessarily follow, this is something I know very well in South Africa, that because you have the best constitution in the world, that you are going to have freedom on the ground for queer people, for homeless people, for anybody. So South Africa, this country with this amazing constitution, also has an unbelievable high rate of violence against queer people, and particularly gender non-conforming queer people. I'm sorry I can't give you an easy theory of change. All I can say is that what I've observed everywhere is this dance at work, this dance between social change and legal change. But somewhere in the middle of those two is an individual, a person, a community with agency. And it's when that person exercises their agency in a proactive way, that change happens, not necessarily easily or constructively. But I guess at the very core of my theory of change is a notion that people may change themselves rather than that change is made to them.
Yeah, no, I think as
done to them.
Hi guys, this is Josh from Town Hall. I hate to interrupt. Samantha, we're having the same static come through from your mic. So I don't know if you want to try. I've just got you on mute, but I hate to put us on pause really fast. But if you want to try just troubleshooting what we did before, and then we can resume in just a second. Okay. Yeah, all right. Sorry, everyone. Give us just one moment.
Hello?
Hello.
Very clear to me.
Yep, you're
Yeah.
coming through great. Okay, go right ahead.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Sorry about that, folks. My mic sometimes randomly decides to start staticking. And thank you for that, Mark. That was very interesting. I mean, I think one of the reasons why it's so hard to write about is you and I are both trying to write about it as it happens. You know, they say journalism is the first draft of history, and so we're both, I think, invested in trying to capture queer history as it's happening. And I think one of the challenges with that in the 21st century is that it feels like it's moving so fast. You know, here in the States, a decade ago, support for same-sex marriage was not like the majority position in this country, and of course now it's a strong majority position. It's an outlier position to be against same-sex marriage now, and tracking how quickly that happens can be a challenge. How do you feel like you try to kind of hit a moving target, you know, like 21st century queer history?
I mean, it is very difficult to put a period at the end of your last sentence and hand your book in, because you know that by the time the book comes out, things will have moved on like considerably for the very reasons you discuss. I guess the way one of the things I did was is that I decided I knew from the beginning the book was going to take many years to research. And I began researching it in 2012, and I finished my research really when I put that period on last year. So that even if I can't bring you, the reader, right up to date, which a book never can do, at the very least I can show you how things shifted during these years I chronicle. And they are, I would say, critical years. They are really the years when the pink line was staked and drawn. Not that the pink line is no longer there. I have an article published today about the pink line in Sudan, a country that has just fascinatingly taken sodomy off as a capital punishment. It's still illegal. You can still go to prison, but you're no longer going to be killed for it or lashed for it. So even as we talk, there are actions and reactions. Since I wrote my book, there was, as I'm sure many of your listeners know, many of the listeners here know, an election in Poland where LGBT ideology was the main issue, and the candidate who won, Andrzej Duda, campaigned against LGBT ideology, which he said was a threat worse than communism to Polish society. So the pink line is ongoing, and all I can hope to do is having given it to you over a period of time, having shown you these people's lives over a period of time, give you a sense of how change works. And to this question of things moving quickly or slowly, I quote two people in my book, and I have them talk to each other. The first is the president of Senegal, a West African country, who complains to a German journalist that it's really unfair to ask of the Senegalese that they change their laws, because change happens very, very slowly. And look how long it took for the laws to be changed in the West. So that's Macky Sall, Senegalese president. And I put him into conversation, I'm sure against his will, with an amazing Ukrainian activist, a woman named Lena Sevchenko, who told me how when she first started introducing LGBTQ.
Looks like we,
Mark, there?
yeah, we. It looks like Mark just might have lost connection. So just give us 1 second, everyone. Sorry about this.
Okay. Are you still getting static from me, Josh, or am I okay for
You're
now?
sounding great.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for bearing with us. We're still just trying to reach out to Mark. As some of you may already know, Mark is in South Africa right now, so there's obviously going to be a bit of a delay, but please just hang in there and we'll get the show back on the road. Sorry. Alrighty, everyone, I've got a hold of Mark. His internet just dropped, and he's currently just resetting his routers, so hopefully we'll be up and running soon. Again, thank you for hanging in there. Don't forget about the Q&A, which should be coming up soon, and the Ask a Question box just at the bottom here. Yeah, just input any questions you have there, and hopefully we'll have Mark back with us shortly. Thank you.
I'm back. Can you hear me?
You're back. I can hear
Oh
you.
God, I'm so sorry, Samantha. I don't know what happened.
Not a problem. We're making it work. We were talking about whether change was happening quickly or slowly, and you're talking about how in Senegal you were kind of putting two people
Yeah,
in conversation
yeah,
with each other
yeah.
around that
So
notion.
what I was having Olena Sevchenko, who's actually Ukrainian, talk to Macky Sall, who says that the Senegalese president, and the Senegalese president says change is happening very slowly, and the Ukrainian activist says change is happening so quickly. And the point I make in my book is that both statements are true. And as a result, living on the pink line can be quite dizzying because of the way you have to shuttle between these two time zones every time you look up from your smartphone. If you live in a country like Senegal, or you walk up from the underground nightclub onto the street where you might be gay bashed, as happens in Russia. It's a very complex and I think very contemporary um, uh, juxtaposition of times.
Yeah, it's kind of both at the same time, and
Mm.
it's dizzying in its complexity. But I think the book threads it really well. I want to get to some of our audience questions, but I want to selfishly ask you one of my last questions that I had an agenda coming in here with is, you and I have talked before this about how you felt like I was someone who read the book and really saw how it had been a transformative experience for you, that you chart the ways in which the lives of your subjects change, but you were also changed by the reporting of it. Could you speak to that a little bit? How do you feel like the journey you went on for the Pink Line, both physically and in terms of your reporting, kind of altered your understanding of yourself?
Yeah, I'd love to ask you the same question about your book if you have time to answer that.
Yeah.
In not just my understanding of myself, but my understanding of the world. I, I had to be absolutely frank that when I started on this journey nearly a decade ago, I knew so little about gender identity and what it meant to be transgender in particular. And I held within me a lot of the, now I feel quite shameful, preconceptions and stereotypes about what it meant to be trans. And that for me has been the biggest journey, is 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 having come to understand fully um, what gender identity is about, and and how people live with gender incongruence and what they do about it has been a huge lesson for me. And it's been a lesson that I've been able to apply to myself too. I mean, I am a cisgender man. I use the he, him, his pronouns. I don't think um, I am non-binary or transgender. Um, but along this journey, I've come to understand my own gender more fluidly. Um, and it came to me, and I was talking earlier about the Kotis in South India. And in the way of these things, when I first met them, there was a go around. And we had to say our name, we had to say our pronouns, and we had to say our gender identity. And when it came to me, I said Mark, he, him, his, Koti. And it's interesting, it came out of my mouth. I didn't mean to say it. And I've reflected on why I said it. Sure, it was on one level a way of manufacturing empathy, of showing these people with whom I didn't even share a single word of common language, because they don't speak any English, I don't speak any Tamil, that I had something in common with them. But it was more than that, because it felt very good to say that I was Koti. And it was a, a recognition to myself that I'm not what I was raised to be and who I thought I was. And I think that's one of the most powerful gifts of being a journalist, is the way it exposes and and it to me, particularly coming from a sort of liberal Western perspective, but I mustn't always think of myself as, you know, the resolution to other people's problems, particularly when I go as an openly gay man to a village in South India, that how important it is to be open to other journeys, other paths, other ways of being, even within myself.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I think it's impossible not to go on a journey like the one you did, or like the one I did for my book, and not come away changed by it. I think that's one of the beauties of being a journalist, is you get to just intersect with people's lives, and they move you and touch you and change you. I want to get to some of our audience questions, and thank you so much for talking with me. This has been a great conversation, even though we've each had our own technical hiccups along the way. This is a question from Jameson Green. Says, I'm very excited to see that your book is out, and I look forward to reading it. And this sort of touches on something we were just mentioning. My question is, have you found that there's a different quality in the pink line for trans people around a different kind of quality or texture to the pink line around gender identity and expression, as opposed to the line around sexual orientation, rights, and freedoms?
It's wonderful to have Jamison Green's question. He's really one of the pioneers of trans rights in the United States, and was one of the very first people I interviewed in the US when I came to the United States to trace my pink line in the US, which was around specifically early transition. And what I do in the US, I'll just say in a moment before answering Jamison's question, because in a way it does answer it. What I do in the United States is I follow a group of kids when I met them, all of whom were members of an LGBTQIA youth group in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I follow them as they come into their identities and online, and they cover the waterfront. And in this group are non-binary, is a non-binary kid, is a kid who transitioned very clearly and doesn't rejects the word queer. There's also, interestingly, a detransitioner who doesn't have any problem with detransitioning, in the way that detransition is often put out there by people opposed to specifically early transition as a warning bell. But that's another story. Yes, there is a different quality, of course, to the pink line as it affects gender identity in many, because of the very particular threat that transgender people are presumed to be in countries like the United States or the United Kingdom to the general population. And I say presumed to be by what I believe is not a majority, but a very vocal minority whose voices are unfortunately heard. That being said, the way that threat expresses itself is not dissimilar to the way the threat expresses itself against gay people in countries where same-sex relationships or homosexuality has not yet been kind of accepted or normalized. So it's a threat to our children, is something. Transgender people are a threat to our children, is something that trans people in the US or in the United Kingdom might hear today. And that's not dissimilar to what gay people would hear about them in countries like Nigeria or Uganda, or what gay people of my generation and older would have heard when they were growing up in the United States. So in that ways, there's a confluence. Another way that I think there's an important confluence is the way that that on the other side of the pink line, and it's the other side to where I'm sitting today and where you're sitting, Samantha, on the other side of the pink line, gay and trans are the same thing, right? So Pasha, the transgender woman I write about in Russia, lost custody of her child, lost the right to access her child, thanks to a court's interpretation of the Russian anti-gay propaganda law, which the judge interpreted as saying that if Pasha were to see her child, she would be promoting homosexuality to this child, and therefore she wasn't allowed to see her child. Now, there's nothing in the anti-gay propaganda law about transgenderism at all. But as far as this judge was concerned, Pasha was a queer and a pervert, and that was the end of the story.
Yeah, no, I mean, it strikes me hearing you talking, I'm an openly transgender woman myself. There is something about this pink line around gender identity that seems to get at it just really foundational beliefs about gender that I feel like can be tremendously destabilizing for religious leaders, government leaders, institutional leaders. Comes to mind the Pope comparing, gender theory as to like nuclear weapons or something. That there's something about transgenderism that will blow up the whole world. And I think that's.
I mean, I should say.
Yeah.
I mean, what's interesting is where it works the other way. Like Pakistan is a country where homosexuality is illegal and that is enforced. And yet Pakistan is one of the few countries in the world that permits self-determination for transgender people. So in Pakistan, as in I think 7 other countries in the world, you can name your own gender legally without any form of certification. Iran is another interesting country where there's a death penalty on homosexuality, and yet has one of the most extensive gender reassignment or reaffirmation programs globally. Now, what's happening in those countries is that as long as you're in the binary, you're okay. So what is threatening and impossible to the Pakistani law or Iranian law is this notion that you might be queer and in between. So if you're a faggy guy, you must be a woman. So let us help make you into a woman. And that way you can have a place in society that we understand and you're not a threat to us. So it works both ways. You're absolutely right about in most of the world the threat that transgenderism seems to carry. But there is that other side of it too.
Yeah, it speaks to something you explore in the book, which is that the pink line is drawn in different places and in different cultures, and sometimes ways we might not expect. Let me get to at least one more of these audience questions. This is from Erica. Hi, Mark. You mentioned a few themes you recognized when observing the pink line. For example, some people in Nigeria may want to push back against imperialist influence, while some people in the UK are weaponizing LGBTQ rights to support the myth of the civilized and the other. What other global themes did you observe, if any? This is something I think you handle so well in the book, is this kind of tension between a country like Nigeria pointing to LGBT NGOs or human rights groups as saying, "Oh, this is imperialism," and then on the other side. Sorry, I'll let you tackle the question.
Well, that same theme refracted in a different way in Western Europe between sort of Russia or Putin and Orban of Hungary on the one side and the European Union on the other side. But when it comes to gender identity, another global theme that I found fascinating is the way that while in the United States and countries in the West, there's been an increasing understanding of gender as a spectrum and of non-binary identity, and you guys in the Pacific Northwest know this really well. What's happened in other parts of the world is that as globalized notions of transgender identity, of biomedical transition, and of rights are being downloaded, how these notions are disrupting in interesting ways sort of age-old cultural traditions. So I spoke earlier about the Kotis in India and Hijras in India, who've always had a place in Indian society. It's a third gender place. It's a place that's neither male nor female. So there's a spectrum there, but it's not necessarily a happy place. It's quite an abject place. And along comes the transgender rights movement that says, A, you don't need to be in this muddy middle. You can transition to womanhood and live your life as a woman and have the rights of a woman, which, are not necessarily the same as the rights of a man, but they're more than the rights of a hijra. I'm not speaking about legal rights here, but I guess norms, let's say norms rather than rights. But what's happening is, as these ideas lodge, is that the spectrum is becoming more of a binary in some respects in countries like India and like the Philippines. In some parts of the world, the global LGBTQ rights movement has disrupted age-old traditions to such an extent that, as in Senegal, a community called Gojigen, which means men, women, have literally disappeared because they've always had space in urban Senegalese society. They were very important as people who held events and did decorating. They were male-bodied people.
Did we lose Mark again?
And who were the most visible?
Oh, there we go.
Who were the most visible?
We thought we
Sorry,
lost
we lost you for a second.
Go for it.
Just about 30 seconds.
Okay. Well, I'll end it there because I know we're coming to the end of the presentation. Forgive me for the problem we've had connecting.
Well, thank you so much for joining us from South Africa at 5 a.m. We're really appreciative.
Thank you, Mark. This was a pleasure to chat with you. And I feel like you and I had a great time connecting personally, if not technically.
Agreed. Thank you so much, Samantha, and thank you to Town Hall for hosting me.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Samantha and Mark and audience. Thank you for sticking with us tonight. It's been an extremely compelling conversation, and if you're interested in picking up Mark's book, please do so from our friends at Elliott Bay Books. You can be linked over to their site via the Buy the Book button at the bottom of the screen. So yeah, just another deep thank you to Samantha for guiding us through this convo, and Mark for sharing so much of your book, and of course, again, joining us from South Africa. This has been, another great night here at the virtual town hall. So I'll sign off. Thank you again, Mark and Samantha. Thank you, audience. Have a good night. Buy the book. We'll see you later.
Bye-bye.